I want you to imagine something, just for a second. You are walking down the street, you glance down at the pavement, and right there on the concrete is a piece of paper with $100 printed on it.
I mean, that's a pretty good day.
Right. But if you are, like most people navigating our, globalized world, your brain doesn't even have to process the raw visual data.
No, you instantly conjure up a very specific, deeply ingrained image.
Exactly. You see that greenish-gray paper, you see Benjamin Franklin staring back at you.
Oh, absolutely.
You know precisely what that piece of paper represents, what kind of social power it holds, and like exactly how many groceries or tanks of gas it can buy you. It's just a completely fixed concept in your mind.
Well, it's an incredibly efficient mental shortcut, really, because the typographical symbol of the dollar sign, the number 100, and the physical object of the American bill, they're entirely fused in our cognitive architecture.
Yeah.
We rely on that kind of immediate universal legibility just to function in daily life.
But today, we are shattering that assumption.
Completely dismantling it.
Because the reality of what $100 actually means, when you look at it globally and historically and, well, digitally, is just massively fragmented.
It is so much weirder than just an American bill.
It really is. So for this deep dive, we're looking at a piece of source material that is fascinatingly sparse. We're analyzing the Wikipedia Disambiguation Page for the exact term, $100.
Which, on its face,
Yeah.
sounds like the driest possible text we could ever examine.
Oh, totally.
I mean, a disambiguation page is an article. It has no narrative, no thesis statement, no authorial voice at all.
Yeah.
It is pure data architecture.
So, okay, let's unpack this, because you would think a disambiguation page is just, a boring piece of internet plumbing.
Right.
But when you actually read the data it contains, you start discovering the sheer scale of global human categorization. It is essentially a fossil record of how we organize value.
It really is.
And before we really get into it, we need to establish the ground rules set by the source text itself. The page explicitly states at the bottom, quote, "If an internal link incorrectly led you here, you may wish to change the link to point directly to the intended article."
And that sentence, honestly, is the entire reason the page exists in the first place.
Yeah.
It's an admission of failure. It exists to catch readers who are lost because human language is fundamentally messy.
It really is.
We use the exact same symbols to mean wildly different things, and the disambiguation page is basically the digital traffic cop trying to untangle that linguistic collision.
So let's look at the first tier of this collision. The page begins by outlining specific banknotes that are culturally or economically significant enough to have their own dedicated standalone Wikipedia articles.
Okay.
And right away, the taxonomy is fascinating. It starts somewhat predictably. You have the Australian $100 note, the Canadian $100 note, the New Zealand $100 note, and the United States $100 bill.
I think it's actually worth pausing right there just to look at the nomenclature.
Oh, the bill versus note thing?
Exactly. Notice that the United States version is the only one in that top-tier group designated as a bill, whereas the Commonwealth nations use the term note.
Huh. Yeah, that's true.
Even at the absolute highest level of global finance, before we even leave the English-speaking world, there's a linguistic divergence based on regional vernacular.
Right.
The database just has to accommodate both bills and notes as equivalent realities.
Right. But it's the next part of the list that really fractures the idea of a unified concept.
Oh, definitely.
Because right after those major Western currencies, the text shifts. We get the Nicaraguan 100 Cordoba note. We get one of the banknotes of the Hong Kong dollar.
Which are still broad national categories.
Right. But then the categorization becomes incredibly, almost painfully granular.
Yeah.
It lists one of the fifth series of the new Taiwan dollar banknote, and it rounds out that primary section with one of the banknotes of Zimbabwe.
That structural inconsistency tells you everything you need to know about how human knowledge is actually built in a crowdsourced environment.
Because it's so uneven.
Exactly. Wikipedia is not handed down by an omniscient, perfectly objective editor. It's constructed from the bottom up.
It totally shatters the idea that $100 is a monolith. I mean, it's like meeting a dozen different people named John from around the world.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. They share the exact same identifier, like when you yell John across the lobby, they all turn around. But their identities, their backgrounds, and their values couldn't be more different.
One's a baker, one's a CEO, one's a medieval king.
Exactly. They share a namespace, but their actual realities have zero overlap. A U.S. $100 bill and a Zimbabwean $100 banknote are sitting in the exact same digital waiting room here, but their economic realities are light years apart.
The John analogy is spot on. And if we look at the mechanics of why, the new Taiwan dollar is listed so specifically, calling out the fifth series, it reveals the human neuroses behind the database.
What do you mean by that?
Well, why do the Canadian or Australian currencies get painted with broad, generic strokes, while the Taiwanese currency demands this hyper-specific classification?
My guess is that it's a reflection of historical friction. Like, a currency only gets that specific if it had to be redesigned, or if there was an inflation event, or, honestly, if a very pedantic group of editors fought a turf war over how to classify it.
Exactly. Hyper-specificity in a database usually points to trauma or complexity in the real world.
Wow.
Perhaps earlier series of that note were demonetized, or there are significant counterfeit issues requiring a separate article for the modern, secure version. But the thing is, the disambiguation page doesn't judge the why.
It just lists it?
Right. It just coldly flattens all these different levels of historical importance into a single bulleted list. The broad concept of American money and the hyper-specific iteration of Taiwanese money are granted the exact same structural weight.
And that flattening effect becomes incredibly apparent when we transition away from the dedicated articles and look at the broader footprint of this page.
The big list.
The massive list. There's a massive secondary block of text under the heading, quote, other currencies that issue $100 banknotes, bills, or coins. And before you even parse the individual countries, you are hit by the overwhelming, staggering dominance of the word dollar.
It is arguably one of the most successful linguistic exports in modern history.
Let me just give a sample of this list to illustrate the sheer volume. We have the Barbadian dollar, the Belize dollar, the Bermudian dollar, the Brunei dollar.
It just keeps going.
It really does. Cayman Islands, Eastern Caribbean, Fijian, Guyanese, Jamaican, Liberian, Namibian, Singapore, Solomon Islands, Surinamese, and the Trinidad and Tobago dollar.
When you lay it out geographically like that, you are bouncing across completely disparate ecosystems.
So what does this all mean? I mean, we are jumping from the Caribbean basin over to the African continent, down into Oceania, and across Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
These are places with completely different indigenous cultures. Drastically different climates, different political histories, and distinct modern economies. Yet they are all completely united by this single specific word, dollar.
To understand why that happens, we have to look at the mechanics of post-colonial monetary policy.
Okay, lay it on me.
This list isn't just a catalog of paper money. It's a literal map of global trade signaling. When nations transition from colonial rule to independence, or, when they attempt to integrate into modern global markets, establishing a fiat currency is one of the most critical steps for sovereign legitimacy.
So they adopt the word dollar as a kind of shorthand for stability.
Precisely. It's a psychological and economic signal. By naming your currency a dollar, you're attempting to borrow the perceived stability and the immense gravity of the American or British economic empires.
That makes a lot of sense.
You're telling international investors, the global banking system, and your own citizens that your money is legible, that it fits into a recognizable framework. The concept of the dollar operates very much like a global franchise model.
Like the golden arches of global fiat currency.
Yeah, that is a great way to think about it. If you open a fast food franchise in Fiji versus Namibia, the physical building will look different, the local management is different, the pricing is adjusted for the local economy.
But the branding remains identical so that a foreign investor recognizes it instantly.
Exactly. The $100 mark works the exact same way. The artwork on a Guyanese dollar is completely localized, the purchasing power is localized, but it is sharing a globalized brand identity.
But what happens when a country's currency has absolutely no historical or linguistic connection to the word dollar, yet they still use the exact same symbol?
Ah, yes.
Because the page doesn't stop at the dollars. When you read further down that secondary list, you hit regions that use entirely different linguistic roots for their $100 markers.
The Latin American cluster is the most prominent example of this.
Right. You have the Argentine, Chilean, Colombian, Cuban, Dominican, Mexican, and Uruguayan pesos. Then right below those, you find the Brazilian real. And then, hidden among all these major national economies, the list gives us these beautiful, almost poetic standalone currencies. You have the Samoan Tala, the Cape Verdean Escudo, and the Tongan Palanga.
Those standalones are fascinating. They represent a preservation of unique cultural identity within the financial sphere. Escudo, Tala, Palunga. They don't rely on the dollar franchise branding at all.
Which raises a really fundamental question for me about the architecture of this whole Wikipedia page. Let's go back to the source text's own rules. This page exists if an internal link incorrectly led you here.
Right, the traffic cop.
Yeah. If a human being is sitting at their computer and clicks a link expecting to read an article about $100, they are almost certainly looking for dollars, maybe pesos.
Very likely, yeah.
What are the actual odds they were searching for the Tongan palanga? I mean, why on earth are we grouping a palanga under a $sign disambiguation page? Isn't there metadata to separate these things out?
You would think so, but what you are observing here is the absolute limit of dual architecture. It's where human cultural nuance crashes headfirst into cold, rigid database logic.
I feel like it's a filing issue. It's like a librarian who only knows how to sort books by the color of their spine.
That's a good analogy.
So they take a complex French cookbook, a gritty murder mystery, and a children's picture book, and they throw them all into the exact same pile simply because all three books happen to have a red cover. The librarian doesn't care about the plot. They only see the color red.
That is exactly how the database functions. To a computer system, to the underlying ASCII or Unicode text that actually makes up the internet, the symbol of the $sign does not possess the concept of American economic hegemony.
Right.
It does not know what a dollar is. It only knows that it is character U plus 0024. It is just a typographical keystroke.
So the architecture is essentially ignoring the actual word tella because it's overridden by the visual symbol.
Yes. Over time, that specific symbol has become a typographical catch-all because nations like Tonga, Samoa, and Cape Verde happen to use that specific character to visually represent their currency. Even though the spoken word and the economic reality are completely different, the database just dutifully sweeps them all up.
It just grabs them all.
It drags pesos, escudos, talas, and palangas into one single digital room because they share a Boolean search term.
It strips away all the cultural context in favor of pure searchability.
Completely blind to context. And it forces you, the reader, to realize something rather profound. What many people assume is a deeply American symbol, the $sign, is actually a shared global piece of typography.
Wow.
The digital architecture doesn't care about Benjamin Franklin. It only cares about the keystroke. It forces homogenization.
That is wild. We build these incredibly complex digital networks hoping they will map the nuance of human civilization, but ultimately the machine just groups us by the shapes of our symbols.
Which leads us to the most extreme example of that homogenization on the entire page.
Oh man, this is where it gets really interesting and honestly very funny.
It really is.
Because just when you think you have a handle on this taxonomy, just when you think, okay, the term $100 is strictly reserved for government-issued fiat currency and Boolean database sorting, the source text takes a sudden, sharp left turn.
A complete departure from sovereign wealth.
At the very bottom of the page, underneath all this heavy geopolitical and macroeconomic data, there is a section simply titled Other Meanings. And under this massive, globally significant heading of $100, there's exactly one item listed. Let me read it to you. $100, a Canadian alternative folk country band.
Just sitting there, completely alone in its category.
I mean, you spend this entire deep dive thinking about the mechanisms of global trade, post-colonial geography, the hyperinflation in Zimbabwe, the sheer economic gravity of Singapore.
Yeah.
And then, sitting quietly at the end of the internet, is an alt-folk country band from Canada.
It is deeply absurd, but it perfectly illustrates the philosophy of an encyclopedic database. In the physical world, power dictates hierarchy.
Sure.
The United States $100 bill commands global markets. It dictates the cost of oil. It influences international diplomacy. A Canadian folk band, despite whatever artistic merit they possess, does not dictate global trade.
They aren't exactly moving markets in Tokyo, no.
No, they are not. But on this page, the hierarchy vanishes entirely. In the realm of pure data, under the heading of topics referred to by the same term, they hold the exact same structural weight.
It's crazy to think about.
An alphabetical bulleted list is the ultimate equalizer. A nation's sovereign currency and an alternative folk country band are merely equal data points. The database refuses to assume what you, the user, value.
It doesn't presume intent. Like, if you type $100 into a search bar, you might be an economist looking to analyze the historical inflation rate of the Argentine peso. Or you might just be a fan trying to find the tour dates for an indie band in Toronto. And Wikipedia treats both of those human desires with the exact same level of architectural respect.
It is a leveling of human endeavor. It treats grassroots, art, and macroeconomic policy as equivalent, simply because they happen to share a naming convention.
So let's bring this all together for you listening right now. We started this deep dive by asking you to imagine a simple piece of paper on the sidewalk. You probably came into this thinking $100 was just a rigid, straightforward concept.
It's a specific amount of purchasing power wrapped up in a familiar green design.
Right, a fixed value in a very small, personal world. But over the course of examining this one sparse Wikipedia page, we've traveled through the invisible layers of how humanity organizes itself.
We really have.
We looked at the pedantic battleground editing that requires the new Taiwan dollar to specify its fifth series. We mapped out the sprawling post-colonial franchise of the global dollar and how newly independent nations use it to signal stability to the West.
We also explored the rigid, unfeeling nature of digital architecture and how a simple typographical keystroke forces the Tongan Puanga and the Mexican peso into the same room,
Yeah.
stripping away their cultural identities in favor of searchable code.
And finally, we found a Canadian folk band sitting at the exact same table as the global banking system, proving that inside a database, art and money weigh exactly the same.
The takeaway here is to recognize the invisible complexity that surrounds even the most mundane parts of our lives.
Absolutely.
The internet promises us infinite nuance, but as we've seen, it often forces homogenization to make things searchable. The next time you see the $100 symbol, whether it's on a price tag, printed on a bank statement, or written on a scrap of paper, don't just default to thinking about your own local currency.
Let it be a reminder.
Right, let it be a reminder of the vast, beautifully chaotic web of taxonomy, history, and digital architecture hiding right behind that simple string of characters.
It's a gateway to how we categorize reality itself. And we want to leave you with one final thought to ponder today. When you look at the totality of human history, all the art, the science, the literature, the wars, and the cultural movements recorded on Wikipedia, the term $100 disambiguates almost entirely to state-backed money.
Dozens and dozens of sovereign currencies.
And out of all human creation, exactly one band.
When you really think about that ratio, what does it tell us about the absolute grip that money has on our shared human language?
That is the question. We started by asking what that piece of paper on the sidewalk looks like, but maybe the real question isn't what's printed on the paper. Maybe it's why that concept of transactional value has managed to monopolize almost every single definition of the word. Keep an eye on the pavement. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.